Hi, hello everybody, and welcome to the presentation today on Nutritional Guidelines for Duchenne's Muscular Dystrophy. My name is Chantelle from Merwe. I'm a registered dietitian, and I really just want to bring you back to basics and give you some practical, evidence-based guidelines that's not confusing, that just puts everything in black and white so that we can get some good information on how we can support individuals from a nutritional perspective with Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. So I just wanted to give you my information. Like I said, my name is Chantelle. There's my email address, and you can also follow me on social media. My Facebook and Instagram tags are exactly the same. So please feel free to pop me any questions on email if something isn't clear to you. I'm really happy to get back to you on that. All right, so really nutrition plays a hugely important role in managing DMD, as I'll refer to it during this presentation. It really contributes to enhancing quality of life for our patients. And it's so important to start implementing these guidelines as early as possible so that we can slow down disease progression and decrease complications. What I want to touch on today with this presentation is really what we can do from a family perspective to support our patients with DMD. And what are the nutritional goals for nutrition therapy? What do we want to focus on with the nutrition? What do we want to achieve? And yes, get a support team involved. We can't just do everything by ourselves. We need support. We need advice. And yes, we want to personalize our information. This is really important. So yes, today's topic is going to be a little bit more generalized because I'm not just speaking to one person. I'm not just consulting with one person. But at the end of the day, your healthcare professional should be individualizing your treatment according to what stage you are in. So that's really important. We can 100% individualize our treatment. So let's talk about getting the whole family involved. I like to call it a family affair. Really, the whole family should be embracing a healthy way of eating. It is not just the family member with DMD that should be so-called punished to eat vegetables and to eat their fruits and get lots of fiber in. Everybody can benefit from the goals of nutrition therapy for DMD, as these are applicable to the general public as well. In essence, for DMD, we're almost just enhancing a little bit. We're just doing that little bit extra compared to the general person who doesn't have DMD. So the nutrition therapy for your child with DMD or the individual with DMD will be a lot more successful if the entire family is on board. I mean, you can imagine if one person is expected to eat a certain way in the household and the others can eat in another way, it really just isn't practical at the end of the day. And it puts a lot of pressure on the caregivers if this is the case. So keep it simple and everybody should be on board. So I've got a little quote there: alone we can do so little, but together we really can do so much, and we can really support individuals with DMD. Together, everybody, pretty much in the same boat. So let's look a little bit at the goals for nutrition therapy for DMD. We want to preserve lean muscle mass. We want to prevent excessive fat buildup and weight gain. We want to prevent insulin resistance. We want to keep the bones strong, support cardiovascular health, prevent constipation, and prevent kidney stones. We want to do all of this from a food-based perspective. We want to try and steer clear from even more additional medications. Let's first start with food. So let food be thy medicine and medicine be thy food. That's pretty much what we want to focus on. All right, so there's two key factors that we need to look at when we're talking nutrition for DMD. There is preventing overnutrition and there's preventing undernutrition. overnutrition or getting in an excess of calories and nutrients, at the end of the day, is going to contribute to problems with glucose, sugar metabolism, mobility. It's going to be difficult to move around with a heavy body, and it is going to contribute to breathing and heart problems. Undernutrition, on the other hand, is going to also contribute to problems, because now we are probably going to be contributing to muscle wastage, which is going to be contributing to ventilatory or breathing issues. If we're not getting in enough fiber, we're going to sit with constipation. Also, if our muscle function is affected, our digestive functions can be severely affected, and this really has a huge impact on poor quality of life for the individual. So we want to prevent these complications, and at the end of the day, also getting in inadequate nutrition can lead to osteoporosis, which will more than likely lead to increased risk for fractures or bone fractures per se. So what are we going to look at with regard to preventing excessive weight gain? We obviously want to understand what increases our risk for excessive weight gain in DMD. We want to understand why it is such a big issue. What are the consequences of excessive weight gain and obesity? And we also then will look at what are the nutritional recommendations that we can follow that's going to prevent excessive weight gain. And we will delve into the details of portion control and low GI foods, having more foods that's going to keep you fuller for longer, and limiting salt intake can also have an effect. So what are our risks for preventing or risks for excessive weight gain? Persons with DMD have got decreased caloric needs. The fact that they are losing muscle also affects their resting metabolism. Remember, muscle is metabolically active tissue. So if you're losing muscle, your metabolism is also decreasing. So we're not expending as much energy anymore. Persons with DMD are also less active at the end of the day, so they're not expending that much energy. And also, medication can contribute to increased appetite. Things like steroids increases the patient's appetite for carby things, for sweet foods, also just in general appetite. But also, parents and caregivers need to be careful that they are not giving excessive amounts of food to these patients. We can still eat healthy, we can still eat nice things, but in controlled portions. This is very important. So let's look a little bit at the risks of obesity with aging. Having excess weight, being obese, is going to contribute to insulin resistance and potentially diabetes later on. We want to avoid this. We want to avoid issues with cholesterol levels. We want to avoid getting high blood pressure, difficulties with breathing and sleeping at night. With the excess weight, it's putting a lot of pressure on already weak muscle groups, which can contribute to even further acceleration of the DMD progression. There's already stress on the respiratory system. Now having excess weight on top of already weak respiratory muscles is going to worsen these cardiac functions. It's the same with bone health. It's excess weight that's putting excess pressure on our bone health, which can lead to skeletal malformations. Also, a big one, these patients are then less able to take care of themselves. They're already weak, and now this excess weight is making it even more difficult. And on top of that, for caregivers to give optimal care if these patients are overweight and obese, it makes it difficult for them to give the best care to these patients. And let's not forget that there's a big psychology around this. Adverse psychological impacts that further debilitate our individuals with DMD, if they have a physical disability, can't help themselves and feel uncomfortable in their own skin. So really, in essence, we are affecting quality of life for patients and for caregivers if they have got excess weight that they are carrying around, as we just mentioned now on the previous slide. What we have seen from the research is that it's not just necessarily to blame on the use of steroids in treatment for DMD. We have found that there's potentially also a genetic risk factor that is predisposing our individuals with DMD to extra weight gain. So we really need to be super careful and monitor this. It tends to occur more in the preteen teenage years, and we ideally want to measure body composition, not just weight. The reason for this is we want to see if we are monitoring body composition, we can actually see at what rate are we gaining body fat and at what rate are we losing muscle mass. And we can be a lot more proactive if we can monitor these measurements a lot more specifically. So when it comes to energy balance, we need to be careful. Yes, we want to monitor calorie intake. We want to give calories according to how physically active we are and also to how much we are moving. But there's a fine balance. We don't want to restrict calories too much that we're in a huge negative energy balance and then end up losing muscle mass, because this muscle, once lost, doesn't have the potential to regenerate. So it is a fine line. We're not here to starve our patients with DMD, but 100% we need to look at our overall calorie intake and monitor our portions. So let's look a little bit at a few things that we can do to prevent excessive weight gain. Yes, we can control portions. But what do we want to include in these portions, these foods that we're eating? We want to include foods that are low GI, high fiber, that's going to keep us fuller for longer, that's going to regulate our appetite so we don't feel hungry all the time. And also be careful of excessive sodium, salt intake. So here's a really nice presentation, or what is the word rather, infographic rather, on a practical way to manage portions. We really can still include a balanced diet. We don't need to exclude certain food groups. I'd be very careful with excluding certain food groups because we're cutting out several nutrients. So if you are doing so, please get professional help to help you in this regard. So portion control. Let's look at starch portions. This can be roughly about a fist-sized portion. So remember, your starches includes anything from butternut, corn, potatoes, peas, pumpkins, sweet potatoes, and then all your other typical starches that we're familiar with, you know, pap or porridge, our cereals, rice, pastas, sam, couscous. Bread will be limited to about 2 slices for a meal. So this is a big one that we need to monitor, especially because the steroids often increases cravings for starchy foods. Rather fill up on non-starchy vegetables, and we really want to get a nice 2 handfuls or half a plate full of our non-starchy veggies. So this is typically things like broccolis and baby marrows and our green type of vegetables, our salady type of vegetables, our stir-fry type of vegetables, peppers and tomatoes and onions and cucumbers. These are the type of vegetables we ideally want to bulk up on. This is also what's giving us fiber, very important. We'll touch on the importance of fiber later on in our discussion. But lots of good nutrients, our minerals and vitamins there to support our health. Protein can be limited to around about a palm-sized portion. We want to keep our protein portions lean. Reason being, we don't want excessive, unsaturated or animal fat intake. This is causing inflammation. It's contributing to poor cardiovascular health, especially if our fiber intake isn't adequate. So we need to be careful here. And our fat portions we want to monitor. The reason is because a small amount of fat, regardless of how healthy that fat is, regardless if it's olive oil, doesn't matter. Fat in a small portion carries a lot of calories. If you are not expending these calories, you're going to run into problems. So we need to make sure that our food is lean and is prepared in a lean way. So really small portions of fat per meal that we want to include. This is a nice way of presenting exactly the same information that we've just discussed. If you look at your plate per meal, half of this plate should be filled with non-starchy veggies. A nice array of salads and things like baby marrow or like mixed vegetables kind of thing. A small portion of starch, a fist-sized portion of starch, ideally a high fiber portion of starch, not refined types of carbs, so things like brown rice, whole wheat pasta, seeded bread that we want to include here. And our starchy veggies with the skin on, extra fiber. And then our protein, we want that to be lean. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about glycemic index. What does glycemic index mean? It actually refers to the rate at which food is increasing your blood sugar levels. So we have simple carbohydrates and we have complex carbohydrates. Simple carbohydrates is any refined carbohydrate that doesn't have a lot of fiber. And what it does is it gets broken down and digested very quickly in the gut. So the glucose or the sugar from these foods is absorbed very quickly. And please, people, it's not just sweets, it's not just sugary foods, it's any refined carbohydrate, foods that don't have a lot of fiber. It spikes our blood glucose levels. A lot of insulin is needed to be released at this time, which is the hormone that's bringing down our blood sugar levels. Our body almost overreacts, releases a lot of insulin at once. Our blood sugar levels drop below normal because of this excess insulin release. What happens? Your body now signals a need for energy to push up these blood sugar levels now again, because at this stage now you're going to be feeling hungry and tired because our blood sugar levels are now below normal, below where we wanted our levels to be. We feel hungry sooner, we end up eating more, and we end up eating a lot of almost empty calories. It isn't nutritious. On the other hand, complex carbohydrates, fiber-rich foods, allows for slower digestion. So the glucose or the sugar is absorbed a little bit slower. So there's a steady rise in our blood glucose levels, just enough for our body to kind of keep up with insulin production. So it's all sort of in the same range. So our blood glucose levels come back down to normal, but it's not dropping below normal where we feel hungry. So we're feeling fuller for longer. We have more sustained energy. So we eat less and we're getting in a lot more nutrient-dense foods in this case. So what are low GI foods? And why do we want to get them in? Like we discussed now, it's regulating our blood glucose levels, helps to reduce cravings and appetite. So low GI foods includes dairy products, our high fiber cereals and porridges, high fiber breads and crackers, other high fiber starches, most of our vegetables, and we have several low GI fruits. So dairy products include anything from milk to yogurt, buttermilk, but please choose more low-fat options. As I've just mentioned, high-fat options carry a lot of calories. If you are not expending these calories, which is typical for an individual with DMD, we're not moving around as much, it's going to cause excessive weight gain. High fiber foods and porridges, so things like our all bran, oats, cooled down mealie meal actually has a lower GI. High fiber bread, so multi-grain type of breads. Our high fiber starches, which is typically our starchy vegetables, and other things like brown rice, wild rice, quinoa has got lots of fiber, so it's going to keep us fuller for longer in a controlled portion, a fist-size portion. Lots of vegetables. Remember, we want to include at least half of our plate, lots of non-starchy vegetables. And it can include raw. It can be frozen. It's not a problem. And more of our low GI fruits. It doesn't mean we can't eat the other fruits. We just more often want to eat our low GI fruits that is not going to spike our sugar levels. So it can include things like our citrus fruits, berries, apples, cherries, grenadillas, mangoes, typically, and grapes can be included in a portion controlled way. So again, a fist-sized portion for fruit per, maybe in between for a snack or so. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I would, however, limit fruit maybe 2 to 3 max and top up with a lot more vegetable portions for the day. So let's focus a little bit on foods that's going to keep us fuller for longer so that we're not feeling hungry all the time, so that our appetite is regulated. It's high fiber foods, it's protein foods, and it's also fats. But again, I'm going to say this over and over again, please. 100% fat does control our appetite, but use it in moderation, in small amounts. Adequate lean protein. Protein also slows down our digestion, so we have longer, more sustained energy. It also lowers the GI of our carbohydrates. So when we have a carbohydrate with protein, we have a lower GI typically. So we have a slower release of energy from the food for more sustained, longer energy. So high fiber foods, how do we know what is a high fiber food? I've given a few examples, but also if you're buying something from the shelf, you have to look at the nutritional label. And these will be foods that's giving you around about 5 grams of fiber per serving. So let's say you're in the shop, you've got all these breads in front of you. Now, which one of these breads am I going to choose? Compare bread A and bread B. The one that's giving you 5 grams of fiber per serving is going to be the better option. It's going to keep you fuller for longer. You're not going to have to eat as much of it at a time either. Limit the use of foods that containing a lot of sugar. And these are typically foods that's containing more than 10 grams of sugar per 100 gram. So now we're talking per 100 gram and we're talking per serving. On a food label, you get 2 columns, per serving and per 100 gram. I would actually start here and first classify the food. How much sugar is actually in this food? How healthy is this food? Look per 100 gram, make sure that the sugar is under 10 grams per 100 gram, and then move over to the serving size and see how much fiber you're getting. If the food is under 10 grams sugar per 100 gram, it's great. Let's look further and let's, between those options, choose an option that's giving us a lot more fiber per serving. Also be careful of a lot of sodium. We have a condition called Cushingoid, and this is another common side effect of steroids, and the appearance can be avoided by not exceeding 1,500 milligrams of sodium in a day. So the goal is to limit intake of high sodium foods. Again, how do we know what's high sodium foods? We want to go and look at the product per 100 gram. We want to make sure that our sodium is below 1,500 milligrams. Our foods that are low in sodium is the foods that's got 300 milligrams or less per 100 grams. These are optimal. Really try and rather flavor your foods with lots of herbs and spices without the added salt at the end of the day. So here's just a recap on the labels. As I mentioned, you get information per serving and you get information per 100 gram. Start here at the 100 gram mark. Now we can classify the product. Is it a green product? Is it a yellow product? Is it a red product? Green products are the ones that's giving us sugar 5 grams or less per 100 gram. Salt 0.3 grams or 300 milligrams or less per 100 gram. Ideally, saturated fat should also be lower, 1.5 grams or less for cardiovascular health. And we shouldn't be eating a lot of the foods that's giving us more than 10 grams of sugar per 100 gram, more than 5 grams of saturated fat per 100 gram, more than 1,500 milligrams or 1.5 grams of sodium per 100 gram. And then once that's met our category, the product's falling in the green or the yellow, it's okay most of the time, then we want to move over to the serving size and choose more products that's giving us fiber closer to 5 grams per serving. So in this particular case here, this food isn't giving us much fiber. It's not the most ideal option. It's not going to contribute to necessarily helping us to feel a lot fuller for longer. So with regard to preventing insulin resistance, because if it's not controlled, it's later going to contribute to sugar diabetes. We want to regulate our glucose and insulin metabolism. If someone has gained a lot of excess weight, we need to monitor our glucose levels. Go for a test, make sure everything is okay, and be proactive. Don't leave it until everything has gone haywire. Obviously, we want to limit the foods that's spiking our blood glucose and subsequently our insulin levels. So we've just touched on a few of those, typically our low GI foods. And we want to include more foods that's obviously going to regulate glucose and insulin levels. So let's touch a little bit on the function of insulin. I've mentioned it briefly, but let's just quickly recap. Any food that we eat, once digested, is going to be absorbed, and there's going to be a rise in blood glucose levels in our blood. What then happens is our pancreas needs to produce insulin so that we can get down our blood sugar levels. Insulin is almost like a key. It opens our cells that can then absorb the glucose and store it or utilize it for energy. So now it's going out of the blood into the cells. So now our blood glucose levels are dropping back to normal and it's reduced. So this is the function of insulin. What happens when we have insulin resistance? This function, is not optimal. Our cells are not responding optimally, opening up optimally in response to the release of insulin from the pancreas, which means that our pancreas is now producing more and more insulin to get our blood glucose levels down, because these cells are not responding. They're insulin resistant. The cells are not opening up and absorbing the glucose from the blood. So the glucose is staying in the blood for much longer. The cells are insensitive to insulin due to overstimulation. Our blood glucose levels are not reduced optimally. And later on, if they don't respond, we're sitting with very high blood glucose levels and we feel tired. Why? Because the glucose, the energy is just hanging around here in the blood. It's not being utilized in the cells for energy. So we want to avoid this. And how do we avoid this? We can then increase our intake of foods that don't require too much insulin production. So we want to incorporate low GI foods so that we can manage blood pressure on top of regulating insulin levels, manage blood pressure, reduce weight due to increased satiety, and the fact that less insulin is secreted results in better fat loss. And we're regulating our blood sugar levels, so our energy levels also. So we need to focus on not spiking our energy or, our insulin levels. Yes, we want to preserve lean muscle mass. So now we've chatted about we want to avoid excess weight gain. Now we want to chat about how do we preserve this muscle mass that is continuing to deteriorate. So let's look at the consequences of weak muscles or losing muscles, and let's look at how, from a nutritional perspective, we can actually help to preserve our mass. So yes, given that DMD is a muscle wasting disorder, we want to preserve muscle mass and minimize muscle wasting, because undernutrition and weight loss definitely becomes apparent or more prevalent from 18 years onwards. Before that, we generally tend to struggle more with the weight gain. After that, we're tending to struggle with weight loss. So really, we should be routinely monitoring body composition or weighing our patients and referring our individuals with DMD for dietetic evaluation if we are picking up excess weight gain or weight loss. So really, it's sort of like it's a bit of a vicious cycle. Muscle wasting is pretty much what DMD is about. From a genetic perspective, we're losing muscles. But now at the end of the day, the fact that we're becoming weak and we're losing muscle mass has a huge effect on our ability then to eat. Now we're not getting in enough nutrition, and now we're contributing to even more muscle wasting. So we need to work on the cause here. We need to try and preserve as much muscle mass so that we can slow down the progression of muscle wasting, so that we can contribute to adequate nutritional intake and thereby preventing even more muscle wasting or slowing down at least the progression. And we really need to focus on. So let's look a little bit at the consequences of muscle weakness or muscle wasting. Definitely swallowing problems, potential food inhalation, which can cause breathing problems and recurrent respiratory infection, definitely choking hazards, coughing, other gastrointestinal problems like constipation, delayed stomach emptying, prolonged mealtime because we're weak, we're tired, we can't chew thoroughly, it's difficult to feed ourselves. So, and also we're then relying on people to feed. So this can really contribute to undernutrition. On top of that, our respiratory function is affected, which also increases our energy requirements. So it's a vicious cycle because now we're not getting in enough energy, which then contributes to everything else we've just discussed. So we need to be proactive. If solution 1 doesn't work, we need to move on to solution 2. And again, we'll talk about this later, but it is so important to work closely with your support team, to work closely with your dietitian, with your physiotherapist, with everybody else that's involved, your doctors that's involved in your treatment, because we can get on top of things sooner than later. So what do we want to look at in terms of adequate protein intake? There really isn't specific guidelines for DMD in terms of protein intake. So around about 1 gram per kilogram is a fair amount. It's not too low, it's not too high, so it should be sufficient to help with getting in adequate protein intake. Now I'm talking about 1 gram per kilogram. How on earth do you now calculate this? If you're not consulting with a dietitian, which I would, however, recommend to get accurate analysis and prescription for you as an individual, if you're not doing that, look at something like a food app where you can log in your food intake, something like MyFitnessPal. You track everything in detail of what you've consumed for the day, and it will calculate for you how many grams of protein that you eat, and that should be 1 gram per kilogram ideally. This is the app I'm talking about, MyFitnessPal. There's obviously a million other ones that you can use. This is just an example. Once you download these apps, it's going to give you a goal. You need to be eating so many calories and so many this and that. Try and rather stick with your total goal. So as I said now, 1 gram per kilogram. Don't use the goals that provided on the app because sometimes these goals are a little bit excessive. Remember, these goals are for the general public, not specifically for an individual with DMD. So don't use the goals prescribed here. Rather work according to the goals that's been prescribed by your dietitian for you specifically as an individual. But this is a very useful tool to track your intake and just to get a rough idea if you are on the right track. So let's talk a little bit about foods that contains protein. So now I've said you want to get in 1 gram per kilogram of weight. Here is a few examples of foods and the portions in which you would get 7 grams of protein. So a 30-gram portion of beef is going to give you 7 grams of protein. I'm 100% not telling you to eat 30 grams of meat. Obviously, someone would be eating probably 100, 120, maybe a little bit more in a portion, which means if you're eating 120 grams, it's 4 times. So it would be 21 grams in total that you would be getting in a portion. This is just sort of like I almost want to say like a bit of an exchange list. So quarter cup of fat-free cottage cheese gives you the same amount of protein as 2 egg whites or 30 grams of fish or pork or beef or tuna. These are ideally your lean options, which you should ideally be consuming more often. So it's your leaner options. Moderate fat protein portions would be like a ground beef or whichever, some cheeses, which are your lower fat cheeses, which don't give more than 4 to 7 grams per 100 gram, 30 gram servings. A whole egg would give you about 7 grams of protein and so forth. So you can sort of use this also as a guideline in terms of, are you getting in adequate protein? There are 100% plant protein sources as well. So a third cup of beans will give you about 7 grams of protein, or a tablespoon of nut butters. But please be careful. These foods marked with this little thingy here are quite high in fat and should be used in moderation. 100% healthy, yes, we want to include them, but in moderation. The ones with the little smiley face are very nice high fiber options. Again, we want lots of fiber in the diet. So they're giving more than 3 grams of fiber in a serving like this. So you can imagine if you're eating about a fist-sized portion or a cup-sized portion of legumes, you'd be getting in a good amount of fiber in that serving. All right, so let's talk a little bit about keeping our bones strong with DMD. What are also the risk factors for reduced bone mass? What are the consequences of reduced bone mass? And what can we do from a nutritional perspective to try and preserve our bone mass? So steroid use does have an effect, and it is a risk factor for reduced bone mass, but also not doing enough weight-bearing activity and also muscle weakness, because then we're not, doing weight-bearing activity. So try and please keep as active as possible for as long as you can. Do some weight-bearing activity. And if you are on steroids, we will chat now about calcium use. 100% need to get in adequate calcium. Why do we want to maintain bone mass? Because the consequences of reduced bone mass is increased risk for fractures, which can obviously be highly painful, as well as risk for osteopenia, osteoporosis, scoliosis, bone pain. Obviously, poor quality of life if you can't move around, if you've got pain as well. So what can we do in terms of keeping our bones strong? There's several nutrients: calcium, vitamin D, vitamin K, phosphate, magnesium, and several other nutrients: protein, vitamin A, boron, copper, fluoride, iron, manganese, and zinc. These can also be prescribed to you as per your individual needs. Yes, we want to focus on a food-based approach. We want to focus on foods that's rich in these nutrients. Again, why a balanced diet is highly recommended. But we can also use supplementation, definitely with the use of steroids. So what do we want with calcium? For different ages, there's different requirements for calcium, especially with steroid use. And I mentioned that here, so it's milligrams per day. So from 1 to 3, 750, up until 19 to 70-year-olds, about 1,500 milligrams a day. What are calcium-rich foods and where can we get adequate amounts of calcium? So these portions give us this amount of calcium in milligrams. So 1 cup of milk, 300 milligrams, good source of calcium. 3/4 of a cup of yogurt, 300 milligrams. Sardines, 100 grams gives us 370 milligrams of calcium. So these are pretty good sources of calcium. Be careful, not too much cheese. Again, very high in fat, high in saturated fats. Let's go more for our milk, yogurt, include some healthy sardines. Our green veggies do give us calcium, but our absorption of calcium is not that good. And I'll explain that now when I talk about the factors that reduce calcium absorption. So very high fiber intake, over 40 grams a day. We want fiber in the diet. We want to prevent constipation, but it can't be too excessive. And calcium is also minimally absorbed in foods that's containing a lot of oxalates, such as spinach, because it causes calcium oxalate formation, which is then just excreted in the feces. This does not mean that you shouldn't be eating green vegetables. You do absorb calcium from these vegetables, just not as much. But they have lots of other wonderful health benefits, so we want to get in our green veggies. Foods that's enhancing calcium absorption is an acidic environment. So what do we want? We want to actually use calcium citrate compared to calcium carbonate, the form in which you would buy your supplement. So you can have a look at the formation in which your calcium supplement is in. But on top of that, even if you were to use calcium carbonate, if you maybe rather have it with food, you would actually absorb it a lot better, because obviously there is acid formation in the stomach once you're digesting food, which will help. Taking it in smaller dosages, so 500-gram dosages or less. So throughout the day, space your calcium supplement will actually result in much better absorption. Vitamin D also enhances your calcium absorption. So your dietitian or doctor most likely have recommended a vitamin D supplement for you, and is most likely also monitoring your vitamin D levels. Very important. And lactose that's in dairy also enhances your calcium absorption. So you can definitely have a look at these factors to help make sure that you are also absorbing adequate calcium from your supplements and from your food. We want to support cardiovascular health. Our patients with DMD, especially a little bit more overweight, can have cardiovascular health issues. So we want to increase our intake of heart-healthy foods, reduce intake of foods that's negatively affecting our cardiovascular health, and encourage as much movement as possible. So what are heart-healthy foods? It's plant fats, so things like unsaturated fats, nuts and seeds and avos and olive oils. We want lots of fatty fish in the diet. If you're not consuming fish, we want to supplement with fish if you're not eating fish at least about 3 times a week. And this is pretty doable. Maybe tuna salad twice a week. It's summer now. Oh, well, at the time I'm doing this presentation, or it's getting warmer. But maybe tuna for lunch twice a week. In the evening, maybe some fish cakes once a week, or some grilled chicken in the oven. And then lots of fiber-rich foods, which is helping to reduce the absorption of bad fat. So it's very good for cholesterol management, our cardiovascular health. Less saturated high fatty meats, excessive high fat dairy intake, especially if your fiber intake isn't adequate. Really, this is going to rev up your cholesterol levels like you cannot believe if you're not consuming adequate fiber. And also be careful of packaged processed foods, especially those that's containing trans fats. So what are we saying? Consume more whole foods, real foods, less foods that's coming in packets and boxes and sachets, and avoid the refined carbohydrates and the sugars, because this can actually also affect parts of lipids or fats that's in your blood, which we call triglycerides. So we don't want excessive intake of this in the diet. We want to look after our digestive health, and what are some of the common ones? Yes, there's lots of digestive issues that can happen with DMD, but some of the very common ones is delayed gastric emptying, acid reflux, and constipation. And it's due to the delayed gastric emptying is due to altered function in our stomach muscles, and the acid reflux also due to the fact that the food isn't emptying quick enough, so it's pushing back up, so we've got this reflux. And then also with constipation, our gut isn't as mobile, the peristalsis isn't working as well, those muscles in the gut aren't moving the food along as much as we want to, so weak abdominal wall muscles also, so we need that to have a bowel movement. And also not having adequate fluid intake and fiber intake is obviously quite a big contributor to constipation. How do we prevent constipation? Let's first quickly look at, it's very common in our individuals with DMD to experience issues with constipation. It's more prevalent in the second decade of life. Why? Because this is where we're getting a bit weaker. We're really starting to see the effects of muscle wastage. And then it's generally prevalent in about 36% of our patients, and more so, even up to 60% or even more in those that are 18 years and older. So in terms of water intake, this is a very simple equation. There are several other ways in which one can calculate water. I just wanted to give a very simple idea. 100% again, your plan can be very much individualized for your situation if you consult with a professional. But try and, for children, try and give about 50 to 60 mils for children weighing up until 10 kilos. So 50 to 60 mil per kilo up until 10 kilos. And then for children, adults, who's obviously then will be regarded, well, probably not physically, but for anyone that's over then the 10 kgs, we would then give 30 to 35 mil per kg. So it's just a very simple equation. There's lots of other ways to calculate this. I just wanted to keep it as simple as possible. It's at least just giving you a rough idea of where your water intake should be. We want to prevent kidney stones because our individuals with DMD are at high risk of developing kidney stones when they're taking various nutritional supplements, maybe not consuming adequate amounts of fluid. So we want to decrease the risk for developing kidney stones by hydrating adequately, avoiding high salt intake. So we've touched on both of these. Increase intake of foods that's rich in potassium, so like legumes, spinach, broccoli, potatoes, bananas, avo, in moderation, in the right portions as discussed. And also citric fruits can help to prevent kidney stones. So let's talk a little bit about our multidisciplinary team or our support team. I really want to encourage you to please consult with everyone that is available to you. The more help you have, the better the management of the DMD is going to be, because we can diagnose and prevent complications by managing the progression of the DMD a lot sooner than later. Rely on your team, but also on other people who also have DMD or other moms or caregivers that's helping individuals with DMD. Utilize and expand your support group. So I just wanted to encourage you with that. Please don't be, by yourself trying to manage this by yourself. Like I mentioned in the beginning of this presentation, it is a generalized presentation. It's not individual for every single person's individual situation. We haven't gone to the extremes in terms of nutritional guidelines for individuals who are really struggling to eat, who are not getting adequate nutrition. Please consult with a dietitian to help you in this regard. It is very important that your treatment is individualized with whomever you are receiving treatment from. So consult with your support team, because this allows for modifications for your individual situation. In the case of nutrition, like I said, dietary modification can be made according to where you are at with regard to your nutritional intake, and the necessary adjustments can be made, and really to support your treatment overall. So please, yes, today's idea was just to give an overview, but we can really individualize your treatment if it's not optimized at the moment. Just wanted to give a few references, and again, here's my details. Please feel free to contact me with any questions. I'm happy to get back to you. There is my email, here's my website, And also, like I said, I'm available on Facebook, Instagram. This is my, what's the word, link, if I can put it like that. I'm really, look forward to actually hearing from you. So please feel free to contact me at any time. Have a wonderful day. It was wonderful to share this information with you. Cheers. Bye-bye.